How does that sound? Can y'all hear me? Excellent. Yeah, I just like to not use the microphone initially. Since I do have a lot to cover, I'm going to start right away. Welcome to From Clutter to Clarity, Redesigning Layouts for Improved User Experience. My name's Mark Baum. I'm a senior application developer at Soliant Consulting, where we are now part owners of the company. Bob and Steve have kindly turned our business into an ESOP. I also used to work at FileMaker, where I was an in-house developer working with Jeff Benjamin, and also a technical consultant for the marketing department. I'm a musician. I love to sing music from South America. I also write songs. I'm feeling like the sound is kind of coming in and out. Is someone adjusting it, or is it just where I turn my head? Oh, it's you. Okay, great. Okay. Okay. Oh, it's way over there. Okay, so I guess I'll, whatever. You may get varying levels of sound. I'm also a maximalist. As my partner will tell you, he heard about this. I told him what I was speaking on, From Clutter to Clarity. He said, oh, you can start with your desk. And I said, no, this is about software. So this is going to be about 3 clients who have kindly let me share their apps with you, or at least an interface or 2. 3 interfaces that needed to be redesigned. And then I went to other speakers at DevCon because I love to collaborate and asked them if, originally the idea was that I would design the interface and like a blind test, they would design the interface, and then I'd show how different they were. But they had to do their own sessions, so we backed off on that and just had them do a little bit. And 3 different journeys that will explore my design process. My guest designers include Jake Johnson from Angel City Data, which is the business that I think of as the premier development house for FileMaker in terms of design, elegant design, and functionality. Matt Odell, who's a dear friend, he was my lead for a while at FileMaker. And he has a session right now. You could just run over there and see it instead, or maybe it ran out of space and you just got stuck here. And Alexis Allen, whom I met at a masterclass given by Albert Haram Alvarez long ago. She gave her session yesterday, so if you missed it, you'll have to see it on the web. And also Ronnie Rios, who's right over here. He designed an interface, and because I am already running out of time, he's going to present it in his session tomorrow at 1:30. I want to thank all my clients. I want to thank my friend Jana, who works at Second City in Chicago, who kind of helped me through this. And I have lots of supportive coworkers and coaches, even people at FileMaker and other speakers. All kinds of people have heard this crazy talk. Maka had the idea of inviting the other guest designers. Thank you, Maka. And Anders Monson collaborated with me on one of the interfaces originally. So legacy apps are applications that are out of date. You still need them, but they don't do everything that you want them to. As you can see, they're everywhere, and it's expensive and risky to replace them, so people just keep waiting and waiting. Redesigning them can extend their life just a little bit longer and make them useful for a bit of time more. If there's a legacy app in your life, this is probably a good session for you to attend, especially if you would like some concrete examples of design choices, and also if you like Bob Ross. If you don't like Bob Ross, you may want to leave now. I am a legacy app ninja. I've been developing in FileMaker since the mid-90s, and everybody sends me their legacy apps. I had legacy apps at UCSF, legacy apps up the yin-yang at FileMaker, legacy apps come to me from clients at Soliant. It's what I do. I have been an in-house developer and a consultant, and I've just become FileMaker 18 certified. But long ago, for example, I remember at FileMaker there were so many apps that we had to juggle. I actually wrote my own XSLT transform to do, it would take the XML from the DDR and give me a really, really fast analysis that I could then search across 50 files. And I needed to turn it around super fast because I was iterating and trying to make sure I didn't break anything. I love it that base elements and inspector and these apps are now so fast that I don't have to do that anymore. I'm also learning to design one app at a time. This session is not lipstick for your legacy. but it is about interaction and visual appearance, which is Jake's point of view, interface organization, which is Matt's point of view, and process-driven design, which is Alexis's point of view. I have 3 case studies, one of which is real and 2 of which are fictional: Lee Real Estate, the real one, Lost and Found Gallery, and Lux Hub. We're going to start with Lee Real Estate. They manage vacation rentals on the island of Nantucket, and they have a FileMaker system where they record the bookings. People call in. They have owners who've been working with them for 20 years and clients who come back to the same house. So they're very kind of high touch and friendly. They don't have some web interface where you go and request a booking. You call them. And the system that they have could use it came to the point where they really wanted to make it easier to make bookings. I'm going to show you what the app originally looked like, what Jake proposed for it, and then what I finally did. I'm going to show you my journey. So let's go look at the original in FileMaker. Oh, and I want to, there we go. I want to just mention Joanne Johnson, who is the consultant for Lee Real Estate. She was part of the FileMaker Developer Challenge a couple years ago, and she thought of Soliant when it was finally time to redesign the system. And she developed the system, 15 years ago or something, and was very proud of the work she did at the time, because at that time, it was cutting edge, a lot of the things that she did. Now it isn't. And I'm going to critique it pretty fiercely. But I'm also going to critique my own work, and I just want to be clear that in each of the 3 cases, someone designed this, and they did the best they could at the time they did it, and they did good work. And now it's time for us to learn together from their example and see what else could be done. So here is the interface. Maybe I'll zoom in. There we go. Is that big enough, or do you want it even bigger? I'll try there. That's about as big as I can get without running out of space. So when a user comes to an interface, one of the first questions they ask is, where am I? And what's most important on this interface? And the fact is, it's kind of hard to tell. We can tell that it's a calendar. Maybe it's Corey Myers' calendar. But then it says rented or available. So unless Corey Myers is for rent, it's probably not that. We know it's a vacation rental company, so if you dig around in the information, you can probably figure that this is a property name. It looks like maybe there are weekly rental rates down here, but it's not easy to figure out. Another question that you're likely to ask is, where can I go from here, and how can I get out of here, right? And pretty much there's a big row of generic buttons. It looks like this one, if I hover over it, tells me it's the main menu. I know that's very small type. Another one, though, says update availability. So it's a mixed bag in terms of what these buttons do. I also want to know, what can I do while I'm here? What can I interact with? Well, there's a bunch of really colorful squares. Maybe those are buttons. Well, no, they're fields. And if I try to type into the field, I get an error message. So this is not interactable. What can I do here? I really don't know. Maybe I can click on this button. Look, it moves us year by year for the same set of 4 months. But there's buttons down here, too, that move me independently year by year for the rates. So there's even a disconnect between the top and the bottom of the interface. And finally, I want to know, how is this organized? How can I make sense of it? How can I perceive groups of similar things? It's actually pretty well organized. There's buttons at the top. You can tell those are buttons. There's a calendar. That's a nice tight group. There's an owner. There's some leases here, or there would be if we were in a different period of time. Maybe I'll back up a little bit. There's leases at the bottom, too, again, if I were in a time of period that shows them. But they're all squished together so much that it's really hard to separate them in your mind, to tell that there's distinct things to be seen. All right, so I'm going to go back to the slides. Jake. Do you like his hair? He recommends that we simplify that interface, that we get rid of noise and distractions, that we focus the user's attention on the main task at hand. Also, that we meet the expectations of the user. The user uses Outlook. The user uses, Google Calendar. They use things online that set their expectations, and we should do our best to reflect those. He also wants to delight the user. He wants to make these brokers feel good about their job. He wants to make them feel like they're helping to rent high-end, beautiful properties, which is really what they do. The interface should reflect that. So let's compare. I'm going to switch to Mr. Jake. There we go. He designed, essentially he did a mock-up for me, and he did that in a graphic design application. He did not use FileMaker. And that set him free to not think about portals and fields, but about a vision. And this is his vision. It tells us, I am a property, right away. There's a picture of it even. And then it says, you are here to book me, because there's a huge calendar. It's so huge that it gets 75% of the screen. Only 25% gets given to the supporting information. When he simplified, he minimized the information about the owner. I don't know if you recall, but there was an address and a phone number and all kinds of stuff. Instead, he just has their photograph so that if I'm the broker and I'm talking to the owner, I feel the warmth of that connection, right? That I'm representing you. And if I talk to the person who wants to be a guest, I know I'm acting on behalf of the owner. It's just a nice reminder that there's a human being there. He got rid of the rates, he got rid of the leases, he got rid of the comments. Probably the client is going to want some of that back. But perhaps he could make card windows or other ways to reveal progressively the information that's needed. One quibble I have is that this is about properties on the island of Nantucket, and he has a property in Michigan, and he has a map telling us exactly where in Michigan it is. And the brokers at this agency know Nantucket like the back of their hand. They don't need a map to tell them where these properties are. They know the streets. So I think that that's probably an unnecessary gold plating on his part. But otherwise, I think he's done a really good job of stripping things down. So he wants to get rid of the noise. Do you see how the waffle of this calendar is more important than the dates? It's just all grid and highlights and texture. So that's all gone. Also, it indicates available days with the color green. When I see that green, I think those dates are booked. Like maybe those are the special dates for the environmentalists. I don't know. But you know, I mean, it means something to me. Whereas in his case, he's cleared out those dates. This is what you see on any common calendar. He's also met expectations by the behavior he's described to me. Obviously, this is just a picture. It's not going to do it. But you click on a date, then you click on another date. It selects that interval, and it represents it like this with a nice ball at each end so you can really tell. Remember how the other one just has rows of color? This actually has a ball at each end to show you the interval. And then a window pops up and says, who do you want to rent this to? You know, it's very interactive. He has a lovely intuitive metaphor of a scrolling timeline. There's little calendars peeking out from both sides, and you can click on them, and it'll slide, right? Maybe he needs an affordance. Maybe he needs a little handle on each side just to give the user a clue that that clicking is possible. But basically, I like what he's done there. And finally, as I mentioned, he's using other tools to do his designing, which means that he's not going to think so hard about implementation. That's liberating. It's also a risk. He has a crackerjack team of developers at Angel City, so he doesn't have to worry so much. Maybe they'll do a web viewer and JavaScript. And by the way, Soliant has an open source free JavaScript framework that lets you do things like calendars, and you should look for it. It's called CRE10. All of this will probably be much easier to do in a future version of FileMaker, as you learned this morning. But still, I think that Jake is pointing the way toward the future here. And he's delighting the user. Such a pretty picture of the house, beautiful, sunny. Everything just makes me feel good as a broker about using this application. All right, so it's time for our journey. Here's a reminder of what the original calendar looks like. And here is, I have to open it up, here's where we're going. This is what it's going to look like when we're done. It's really pretty, I think. I'm sure there are things to improve, but it's very pleasant on the eyes, very restful. Getting from there to here has involved a huge number of principles, all of which I will try to articulate at some level. This is just a reference list for you. I'm not going to explain them all at the moment. We're going to start with white space. This is an extremely small and dense interface. It must have been designed at a time when monitors were square and tiny. So I'm going to open it up. Already, we have a calendar and a property and rates. So much easier. All I had to do was pull them apart. Then I'm going to switch them around, because I like to say on the left is the thing, and on the right is the action for the thing. It's kind of like reading, right? I like the semantics of an interface. Jake has them reversed, and that seems edgy, and I don't know, it seems edgy, but it doesn't read to me. It doesn't read to me like this does. Of course, I think I skipped past something, but that's good. No, here's my final interface with the thing taking action on the thing. And this is basically what I delivered to the client. I know you don't see all the details, but basically you see some white space, and you see some shaded areas grouping things more clearly. You can see that there are 6 months instead of 4. And if I use this little control I have, I don't know if do you see how things are kind of drifting upwards? It moves by 3 months at a time. And I chose that because I didn't want a particular booking to cross a boundary, and you'd have to switch just to see the entire booking. I thought that was pretty important. So this was constrained in budget at the time. This wasn't even the primary thing the client wanted me to do, and it was a project that we went over budget on. I had just started at Client, and I was learning about things like that. So it's not perfect, and in fact, I thought I was just going to show you this and talk about how I got here, but then I looked at it and I said, I can't put that in front of DEF CON, so I made it better. And this talk is about how I made it better. So first I made it rectangular. That's better, because monitors are rectangular. And that allowed me to put the calendar in just a more natural kind of order. I also improved the affordance of those navigation buttons. Do you see now we have 3 months in each direction, rather than just plus and minus. That's an affordance. That's telling the user, when you click on this, this is what it's going to do. On the same kind of mental model, mental models are when what the user imagines the system's going to, the story they tell about the system. And this red color tells the story that this calendar has a lot of, oops, we don't want to go there. I clicked on a button. No, you gotta go back. Okay. This is my fear, is that my buttons are gonna take me, I'm just gonna break the fourth wall for a minute and get to where I'm supposed to be. Come on. Except it's not letting me do it. Okay, I guess I'm gonna, let's see this is the scary thing about having fancy little tools you make for yourself. All right, let me navigate backwards. Find our way. This is called wayfinding, finding your way back. Let's see, we're probably about here. Yeah, that's good enough. All right, so I'm gonna get rid of that, go into browse mode, and pull up my little control again. Okay, good. Oh, and this went into layout mode too. And I showed, okay, perfect. So let's go on to my next layout again and see where I was. Okay, red. Red is a problem. Red, it looks like there's something going really, really wrong for this property. So I just switched the red and the blue. Now, let's see, I think I want to show a different time period. There we go. See how this booking overlaps with this booking? That's what that red means. It means that it's going to be hard to turn this property over quickly. Now red actually means there's a problem, which is intuitively what people expect from that color. The next thing I discovered looking at this was that it was inconsistent. Consistency is important. Any difference, however subtle, from people's expectations makes them uneasy and makes them look for a story to tell about it. And I had a mixture of sans serif fonts on this that I hadn't even noticed until I put a magnifying glass for DevCon. So I cleaned those up, made everything Helvetica Neue. This is a client that is all Mac, and I like that font because it has many, many weights. So you can play with really light weights and heavier weights. If this was for a Windows customer, I would be kind of stuck with fewer options. Do you recall how the weekly rates were independent of the control up here? Well, they still are, and I want to do something about that. This was an architectural change. I had to make a new table and stuff, but it was totally worth it, because now, I don't know if you can see these numbers changing down here. Both things change at the same time. That's coordination. Coordination is connection in the user's mind, and disconnection is something they tell a story about in their heads. They say, well, the developer's really smart, they did that for a reason, and that reason is because, and it's usually not true. I asked myself next whether these weekly rates were even needed on this screen, and the answer was no. How about that? Just a calendar, just like Jake has. Just a calendar, and I can progressively disclose the rates if I want, the user can go see them if they want them. And because this is not the primary layout, I allowed myself to be a little more complicated with it. Visually, it's pretty complicated, but let me zoom in. Check this out. I've got the April rates with April, and the May rates with May, and the June rates with June. And that proximity connects those things in the user's mind so they understand they have a relationship. It's also more convenient because then you can think, okay, I want to book the week of the 21st, and the 21st costs this much, do they want to pay that, right? So it's useful and conceptually reinforcing. The next thing I discovered was that I called it calendar. Oh boy, that was so embarrassing. I think that was the most embarrassing discovery I made when I went over this. We want to help the user know where they are, and everybody already knows this is a calendar. Much better to put the property name and the time period currently being displayed. You can see how if I move by months, that changes, right? That's wayfinding. That helps the user know exactly what's going on at every moment. Additionally, I think I pointed this out before, the data hierarchy issue where the owner is at the top of this whole section, so we think it's about them. That's called visual hierarchy. You want to feature the data that is the most important. So why not just switch to having the property as the heaviest, largest font in the left-hand area of the screen? I also kind of made a little chunk, what Albert calls a chunk of information. I put the property information off to the right. It used to be scattered down at the bottom. We're starting to get a beautiful little rectangle of property-ness. I also had white boxes trying to help me reinforce these things. Like I had a white box saying, oh, I don't know if you, maybe I'll show you. See these, yeah, this is a white box saying I am an owner, which is cheating. It's just extra stuff on the screen. So much better to accomplish that just with the data itself. And I was actually breaking my own rule, which is I like to use shading so that I can have a white background for data entry fields and no fill, no background for fields that are just for display, right? So now I'm following that convention, and I'm requiring that the way I present the data chunk it all on its own. That meant, however, that a button that I had on the edge of the white box now is lost in space. Lost in space. And also, there's a little icon up here for an email to send to the owner, but there's an email address right here for the owner. So, proximity. I'm going to zoom in so you can see the proximity, because otherwise this is all probably just a wash of color on the screen. See how that icon is next to the email address, and now the view button for the owner is next to them? Connections in the user's mind. It's essential. One thing I'm dissatisfied about is that my lease portal, which actually is the dates for these different blocks of color over here, there is no proximity. There is no visual connection at this time. I'm going to work on that later, but I just want you to hold that in your head. And remember that photo that Jake did? I liked it. So I put it right here. Thank you, Jake. Can you see how that creates even more of a box? I mean, a chunk. It creates this nice, it defines an invisible rectangle that contains all this information. Another thing that's very important to me is that interaction have a single color on the layout. Let's zoom out. So all these different interactive buttons, they're not all kind of jumping out at me, but at least they all have the same color. And I use the same color as the hover color on these buttons. But I thought maybe I should make these buttons actually the same color as these, just as an experiment. And I discovered when I did that when I made these, I didn't make them scalable vector graphics. and I didn't go to Todd Geist's wonderful SVG-inator website, which encodes them specially for FileMaker so that they will have hover states. And as a result, this is kind of a mess. So I went to, I used the program Graphic, which is a pretty simple scalable vector graphics design application. And all I did was make my own new versions of these icons because I couldn't find the old ones. And now they all hover. That called my attention to this navigation area. It is really heavy and dark. And I imagine I did that because I thought it would help these stand out, right? It would help with the contrast on the buttons, but it kind of claims my attention on the screen. So I adjusted it. Much nicer. The whole thing feels calmer with these cool grays. And these buttons become more visible. However, now these jewel tones look really saturated to me. So I figured I would back off on them too by making tints that are lighter. These colors, this is really a pure blue, even though it looks purpley, and this green and this red, they are triadic colors, which means that they are equidistant on the color wheel. And I thought it would be interesting to you that the hexadecimal representations of the levels of blue, green, and red look like this, and triadic colors actually rotate the three values. So the position on the color wheel actually has to do with the same levels moving. It's geeky, but cool. Looking up in the header, I thought, why did I use the company logo? The people who use this application know what company they work for. So let's use something that gives a sense of place, helping with wayfinding, mental model, and specificity. How about a nice block of color with a verb saying what's happening on the screen? So I'm going to use this color for every booking interface in the system. And I'm going to connect it metaphorically because this is the color that means booked, right? I'm not choosing any color. I'm choosing the same color that means booked. And also, this reads like a sentence. Book Eagles Erie sometime in this time period. So I really love semantic interfaces. I love giving people clues as to where they are and what they're doing. Having made these changes, I started to feel that I still had heavy shaded areas. The contrast is just not good. These buttons kind of vanish. So I adjusted that. I actually took the whole background away from the calendar area, which makes it seem more important. And I put this, I think because the contrast is so strong now. And these buttons really are visible at this point. And I used tints of this color for all of my shades. Having done all that, I realized that this blue color that I chose, I don't know why, I don't think I had any reason for it, is outside of the basic color family of everything else I've got on the screen. So I figured I should do something about that. I started with an analogous color. And last time when I talked about the triadic, I didn't go to my little website. So here oh, of course I'm not on the network, so that's why I didn't go. There you go, I'm sticking to it. So here is the primary color. It's represented by a teeny little star that you can't see. And then the analogous colors are, imagine this is a pie divided into 12 wedges. The analogous colors are in the adjacent wedges. And they also have a lot in common with each other. You can just see that the levels of red, green, and blue are being raised or lowered for one of the three values. So I started with the lavender analogous color. And this is how it looks. It's kind of My Little Pony's Easter basket of love. I want to say that taste is insisting that what you like is worth liking. This is the principle of self-respect. But finally, you have to talk to your client. So I went with the other analogous color, which is this turquoise. And interestingly, you may disagree, but I actually find that it feels more acceptable. And that kind of pisses me off. I really think this is about the denigration of the feminine in our culture. Seriously. I think that the lavender is the feminine, the blue is the masculine, and somehow we take that in and we think, okay, blue's fine. But I'm thinking of the client and I figure, fine, we'll go with the blue. I also tried green. And my reasoning was that this green is my interactive color, right? I mean, it means interaction on the calendar. So let's experiment with using it everywhere. That was a fail. However, one thing that made it easy for me to make these experiments is that I'm using styles and themes. I'm not going to go into details on this, but styles and themes allow you to make a little package of stylistic elements, like is it green, is it bold, is there shading, is there a hover color, and you give it all a name and you package it up, and you can reuse it for different objects on your layout. And then a theme collects all of those things together so that you can apply the entire package to every layout in your system. It's really convenient, it's really smart, and it's cloud friendly, because as we move forward to having applications on the wide area network, we want FileMaker to work less hard and to push less data up and down the pipe, right? So a style sheet, which is what this is, it's just really a CSS style sheet for FileMaker, allows FileMaker to be more efficient. It doesn't have to think about rendering all the stuff all the time and which layout is different from which layout. So, and I wanted to briefly, this is going to require probably a real zoom. I have a naming convention for my styles, which is I always name the object precisely as it is named by FileMaker. This is a button bar. I don't say segment because that's too much. But I say button bar, and then I mostly say where it is. I guess there's an exception here. And then I say whatever I want after that. Whatever convention you adopt a convention for styles and themes, or you will regret it. All right, so enough of that. I wanted to differentiate these buttons. I've already grouped them into navigation buttons and action buttons. These are buttons that take action on the data somehow, and these are buttons that move you from one part of the system to another. And probably I should zoom in at this point. Come on. Okay, you can see enough there, I think. So I decided to turn these into words and just name the entity that they navigate to, while leaving these alone. And now you can tell that they're very different from each other. You're not really supposed to use entities for navigation. It's better to kind of mirror the workflow of the client, but if your system is already organized by entities and that's how you navigate, why not use a word? Also, I'm not using any call to action. I'm just saying this is where you're going. What I am doing is I'm using a call to action on the other side, an iconic call to action. Search for hits. Refresh availability, add lease, star favorite. So the icon is the verb. You could just use a word too if you wanted to, but I kind of like the combination of an icon and a word. All right, that's it for this layout. Oh, I want to say thank you, Dawn. I think Dawn is here. Yay! Dawn wrote the code for this calendar interaction a number of years ago and offered it to me when she heard I had this project. So all of this selecting and highlighting and dragging and dropping, I think it's really beautiful. And it's FileMaker native, so yay. If I were given this project now, I probably wouldn't use that. I probably would use a web viewer and use JavaScript because there's just more choices. But this saved my butt at the time, and I like it. It's really elegant. So I'll move on to the next screen. And I want to also say, thanks, Jake. Oh, actually, no, the one more thing I want to tell you about that. So when I first designed this, I would select a period of time, and then I would click this little button up in the corner that would let me update the availability. I would choose some tenant, book it, and then, I guess there's so much on this calendar it's hard to tell, but it just booked an interval of time. So that was the process that I thought was really smart. Then Jake came along, and he mentioned that whole workflow that I told you about before, right? That you select the interval, and then it pops up a card window. That's a great idea. So what I realized was that was really actually a tiny modification that would take me 10 minutes. Now I have a card window. That's another kind of connection, right? Another kind of proximity. It's proximity of event, proximity in time instead of in space. And it allows the user to get the connection between the two actions. If I have to go all the way up here and click on another button separately, I have to know to do that. I don't have to know to do this. It just books it for me. Also, I have one less button up here, and it enabled yet another solution that occurred to me after I implemented that. Remember this disconnect over here? Now I can click on a button, it highlights the area, and I can modify the booking. Isn't that lovely? I just think that I love it when what you have can be just tweaked to do something better. And that, I believe, is the end of this journey. There's the old thing, and here's the new thing. And I'm going to go back to the next one. Thank you. It's not rocket science, but it's fun to walk through it like this, don't you think? So the next business is the Lost and Found Gallery. They find junk in the street, and they put it on a pedestal, and they light it really well, and they sell it for hundreds of thousands of dollars. This is actually Marcel Duchamp's fountain, which they didn't sell. This is a replica from the 60s, and it recently sold for like $3 million. For real. They have a FileMaker database, which they use to manage their inventory of art and then to also track fulfillment and invoicing. And I'm about to work for them they have parts of that that's still on paper, so I'm going to work on the paper part. And we looked at the invoice interface, and I was like, we need some space here. We need some room, because I'm going to bring some new ideas in. So I'm going to show you what the app looked like, what Matt recommended, and what I ended up doing with it. Here's the original. I'm trying to go to FileMaker. Here we go, FileMaker. Here we go. So let's go to Lost and Found Gallery. Here's the original interface. I'm not sure that I'm going to zoom in at this point. I don't know that it's necessary. Because look, the first thing I noticed about this is there's a big green P lying down on its side. That's the white space. I mean, that's the first thing. I don't know if it's conscious, but it's the first thing you see. They use this really heavy color. Oops, the top buttons are mixed in, they're equal in appearance and mixed in function. Just like in the other one. At least they have labels here, but they're still just a hodgepodge of buttons. The record navigation claims focus. It's right in the middle, and it's got a very heavy treatment, and it's that old-fashioned, they're actually trying to recreate what FileMaker looked like once upon a time. Everything on the invoice side is crammed together. All this stuff is just smushed. Look at all these text boxes, taking up space. Portals with many teeny tiny rows. And very weak spatial, this is good. This is sort of the follow-up notes area, but look at these spatial relationships. This is stuff about the invoice, the line items, the totals, terms and conditions. It's just kind of random. Here's the same interface with those regions kind of highlighted, so you can get a feeling. Someone must have done this later on. Several developers have worked in this system. So let's go back to the slides. There. Matt Odell. Oh, Matt. I learned a lot about design thinking from him. He's a dear friend. And he recommends that you take inventory of what's on the layout, sketch some ideas, rough out the spaces, and then fill those spaces in. And I'll show you what I mean by that. Here's an inventory that he made of that particular layout. There's stuff that's on the header and footer, stuff that's on the record header. And the idea really is to write everything down separately and group it according to your own logic, rather than simply to replicate what's on the layout. The whole point is to become objective and not follow the patterns of what the layout has. So first he started with a header, then a record header with the important information about the record, and then some big rough areas, right? Then he filled in the line items, the invoice line items. He filled in the totals. I think that's worth zooming in on. Look how pretty. I don't like that icon there. I really want this to line up perfectly with all these other financial, just like if an accountant wants to see that these things all align to the right. They do. They do. they like their lines. Alignment equals relationship. Not just the accountants, everybody, it feels like they belong together when they're aligned. And then he used a tab control to organize everything else. Progressive disclosure. You only see what you need. Here are the various regions according to his organization. Here are those regions without any stuff behind them. Remember that? It's pretty different. Okay, it's journey time. So this was the first attempt on my part to redesign. It's almost just reskinning their layout. And I wanted to experiment with using button colors that matched the wayfaring color that I was putting up here, because I see a lot of people do that. And I have to say, it's really pretty, right? I mean, it feels very harmonious. What I don't like about it is that it just vanishes into the color scheme. I don't feel like the interaction is prominent enough for my taste. But what I'm doing here is using shades of the same color. You really may disagree. Lots of people do this. Instead, I used a triadic color, this sort of red maroon, which is triadic to this. And I love the contrast. It's quite crisp. Doesn't it look pretty? It's a little dark. I mean, for some of these buttons, maybe they almost look black. But I really think it's quite elegant for here. Oh, and I want to mention something that I do with buttons, which many of you probably do as well. I never use the button object. I always use the button bar with a single segment instead of the button object. And that's because you have more options. You can calculate the button label. You have other choices when you make that decision. I actually kind of think that the button object is deprecated. At least it is in my world. I also avoid using button bars with multiple segments unless they're really needed, because these are actually all single segment buttons. And I do that because I can have different sizes. If you do a single button bar, you're stuck with everything being exactly the same width. And if you hide one of them, everything adjusts. It's really annoying. Here, you get to have them stay where they are, and the main feature that you lose is that you cannot indicate which one is active. You don't have that built-in tool of having the active color show up. Other than that, there's not much to lose, I believe. Okay, enough of that. Oh, I went too far. Okay, then well, first I want to say thanks, Matt, because he moved the record navigation to the bottom of the screen. And as a result, I'm not sure I can fit all this. Yeah, as a result, I'm going to hide my buttons for a second. Do you see how there's just 3 groups of buttons now? There's one on the right, one on the left, and one in the center. Users love 3s, right? Especially left, right, and center. It just balances the interface. And by getting rid of that, I can do that. However, it's way down here. So if, in fact, the user clicks on this navigation a lot, I think it belongs up here somewhere, because it's a long journey to travel. But I wanted to kind of point out both the positives and negatives of that choice. What else? I didn't know what to do with this super important information, and I had a big, nice space, so I put it here. Yeah, so I'm kind of hiding some of the most important stuff. These are the statuses of the invoice. This is the top button that they use to update the invoice, and I just stuck them down there because I didn't have anywhere else to put them. These are all fields that need to be organized for entering an invoice, and they just look like a grid. There's no hierarchy, no visual hierarchy to tell me which of these is the most important. So I've got problems. But aside from that, the biggest problem I had is that I talked to the client. And they said, we don't want a tab control. We want to see all the data at once. And you have to pay attention. You can't just say, but design says you want progressive disclosure so you can focus. You have to listen and understand what their concern is. You can advocate for design, but finally you have to accommodate their requirements. And this is the process we worked to kind of get there. We found out that there were fields over here that they didn't even care about. And I moved another one down here because it was just a modification date. It could just be in the footer. They told me that almost every invoice has one piece of art on it. One. maybe 3, never 50 or whatever I had before, all those portal rows. So I get to have 5 portal rows. I figured that's generous. So that was a great win. Talking to the client also is a good thing. You can learn stuff. So now this stuff has moved up, right? Then I thought, let's minimize all this boilerplate. See all the boilerplate text? It's used as data entry, but maybe you can just fold it up and then click in it when you want to actually see it, right? That's FileMaker native behavior. It's free. Also, we had a client ID, and I thought maybe we should have a name. So this is where it's starting to go. See how we have a client? I know this is small. Let's go in for a second. There's a client here with a nice card window, client address with a card window. This is folded up. And now it's the notes that are a problem. There are all these huge notes fields, which have now been hidden in this tab control. So I consolidated them on a tab control. I mean, actually, I used a slider. And I have buttons that cause them. We're going to zoom in again, I suppose. So here we are with the different notes. And I'm just showing one at a time. And the client was fine with that. They were like, yeah, notes? We didn't need to see all the notes at once. We just needed to see everything at once. So we're almost there. The layout's starting to get organized. I just have this problem down here, right? It turns out that all of this is really a status, right? There's a checkbox here you can't click. It's kind of strange, but essentially it means it's shipped or it's been paid. There is a checkbox here you can click. That probably needs to be a button. And then over here there's some important, or some kind of, there's a super important button and some dates that could go in the footer. So that's what I did. The date went down the footer, and look at this. I put a create invoice, an update invoice, and a void invoice. Center, right in your attention, your field of attention. I put the statuses up here, and I gave a primary button treatment to the button that really matters. Now when the user comes to this layout, the first message they get is, this layout is about an invoice, and you're here to update it. Maybe you want to create it sometimes, maybe you want to void it sometimes, but mostly you're going to update it. Oh, and you guys can't see that, right? So now you can. Create invoice, update invoice, and void invoice with a primary button treatment. Finally, I thought, well, Matt might have been right. He put the navigation at the top of the screen, then he put the header information. I have the habit of reversing them. If I do it like this, there's the proximity of the header information connects it to the more detailed information below it. There is no navigation area breaking the two apart. So thank you, Matt. The downside of this is that we're back to the 4 groups, right? We've got the navigation, we've got the acting on the layout, we've got the FileMaker features, and we've got a search box. So we've lost that beautiful symmetry of 3 groups of things. But maybe it's worth it. And finally, I organized things better. I'm very taken with what Jan Lecure Salcedo says about creating a grid using guides. But for the life of me, I have yet to be able to succeed at it. What I have done, though, is to create margins and gutters all over the place. Right? So I've got a 20-point, I don't like to use inches, I like to use points or pixels, and I've got 20 here, 20 here, 20 here, lots of 20s all over the place. It's a double here. I took this big asymmetrical area and took a center line for it. The button, the update invoice button is lined up to it, and so are all these fields. So essentially, instead of taking Jan's approach, which is to make a grid of dynamic guides and then use it a constraint to conform all the fields to it, I let the data first tell me where I think it should go, and then I start to sort of massage it and look for opportunities to line stuff up. And you can see I found lots and lots of opportunities. And what happens then is that the user trusts me. It feels restful. Everything is in order. It's stable. And it's slightly different from where I was before. It's more stable. It's more trustworthy, and it builds the user's confidence. All right, so that was that. A little journey in this invoice system. I'm going to look at my time. So we have 10 minutes. All right. Let's see, I'm going to go, yeah, I'm in the right place. Okay. So I think we're going to have a kind of speed tour through this one. This is a automobile company that rents $500,000 and up automobiles to people who can afford $5,000 and up automobiles. And those folks tend to complain when something goes wrong. So they have a team that handles those complaints, finds solutions. The solutions usually are to give these people money, which I think is really hilarious, but that's how the world works. And the system used to have a big iron integration where all the cases came in, but now that system has gone bye-bye, and so they're just working with the FileMaker system, and that's causing duplication of cases. So I don't know how I'm going to do this, but you're going to see what the app looked like, you're going to see what Alexa's analyzed, and you're going to see what we did with it. Here's the original. Lux Hub. So very quickly, here's the original layout. It breaks into regions, much like what Matt advises. This designer did a good job in grouping things pretty well. And now I'm going to go back to the slides. That was fast. Alexis, she gave a great session yesterday. She and I met, I think I told you, at a master class with Albert, and I've stayed in touch with her ever since. And I really love to see that she has become a staple of DEF CON. I really love to see more women speakers, and she kicks butt, so that's great. She recommends the following. Explore the business process of the client, identify the users and their roles, and then create workflow diagrams, and take each diagram back to the client and refine it. And the more each time you iterate on the workflow diagram, you're going to find gaps in your understanding and likely gaps in the process. And we have a big gap that came up because they changed systems. That's what we're trying to fix, and that's what's going to cause us to restructure the interface. Okay. Fasten your seatbelts. Alexis created a very simple workflow to start with. I think I'll go even further in. All right. The important thing is that it's okay that it's simple because you're going to iterate. Don't think you have to do the Mona Lisa with your first diagram. It's just the beginning of a conversation with the client. She tried swim lanes, so she created entity swim lanes. These are places where you flow essentially, these things have to do with a complaint, and then this step has to do with documents and so on, right? And she identified the start point as receiving a complaint from a customer, which seems absolutely natural. That's what Anders and I thought too. But you're going to find out that maybe that's going to change. So here's our second iteration. It's very similar to the first, except she came to me pretending to be the client, and we discovered together that there's a cycle of communication in the middle of the workflow, right? That originally it was sort of send an email, make a decision, it's all done. But really, there's a conversation that takes place between the rep and the customer back and forth until there's enough information to make a decision. And that indicates that probably this should be featured. This is the top feature of the system, is this communication. And then, oops, it's not journey time yet. Okay, then she created this workflow. Actually, so much more complicated, don't you think? And the first step is that we reconsidered the swim lanes. Rather than using entities, we used user stories. We identified the top user stories. The rep receives communication from the client, from the customer. They initiate communication. Maybe they need to search for a case or contact and to know whether they should add those things. And finally, they propose a resolution. So this thing flows through these user stories instead. Okay, we did that. And I want to say thank you, Alexis, because this helped us discover that the starting point was wrong. The starting point now is that the rep receives communication. They're not making a new complaint. They're just getting an email or a text or something. And I'll explain that in a second. And another insight was that, in fact, there are phone calls and emails and texts and letters and faxes. There's a lot of forms of communication. And sometimes that communication is recognized, but sometimes it's not. The rep receives the communication, maybe it's a text, a family barbecue on Sunday, and there's the client, the customer, who's pissed off about the car. They're not going to go into the computer system and say, which case is this, and where does it belong? And with any CRM, figuring that stuff out even when you're at the office on a desktop is not easy. CRMs are not easy to keep clean. So there's an insight. Maybe these communication items should go into a queue. Maybe they should just go I don't care what case they belong to. I'm just going to dump them in a queue and I'll figure it out later. That supports another feature we were discussing, which was processing incoming mail automatically. Whenever you do incoming email processing, you fail at a significant percentage of those incoming emails, and somebody has to handle them manually. It's the same queue. It's communication that we don't know where it goes. Got to figure it out. So there's a lot of insights that resulted from just 3 iterations of a workflow diagram. Okay, now it's journey time. This is what Anders and I originally did. Oops, that's a little too big. It's a simple list detail, right? And it's just like any list detail. When you do a list detail, you put a plus button at the top of the list. It's just what you do. You click plus, and then you get a new one, right? I mean, that's list detail. It's no-brainer. So, and maybe then you're here, and this is, I want to tell you that, Anders and I did, this was just a prototype we did for the client. They didn't take our bid, sadly. But one of the things we did well is that we gave a lot of space to the complaint, and we came up with this idea of centralizing communication of various kinds in a portal, which was much better than what they had before. And then we had a nice little card window that let them select different kinds of communication and enter it. And that was all great, but it was wrong. They're not about creating new cases. They need to be able to receive new communication and then assign it later to a case. Maybe as part of this wizard, maybe immediately after I create the communication, it asks me, so what case does it belong? I'm like, well, I'm not sure. Let me search and figure it out. Or I just like, I'm too busy. Don't make me do that right now. We also then had an interface for doing that assignment. I won't go into that. And then I was on the plane coming here, and I did not have blank paper, so I had to use lined paper. And this was me sketching. First, I was sketching like the little chunks of communication. I wanted to show this in a portal and have a nice little chunk of this is a piece of communication. It was returned from finance, and this is the client that it's about, and this is how old it is. And you have no idea that that's what I was thinking, obviously, but this is not client-facing work. You can also make sketches for clients, obviously, but that would not be this. This is Mark on the plane with like a little tray table, and anyways, you know what I'm saying. This was my little sketch for creating a master detail layout instead of my dumb little list, or Anders and my dumb little list detail. The advantage of master detail, where you have a list of active cases on the left and then a big, beautiful area for different kinds of case-specific stuff on the right, is that it gives an overview. You back off. You back off from being in a case. You're sort of straddling listness and caseness at once, and that's perfect for this problem of communication. So here is the master detail that I sketched up, and one of the advantages of it is that it's got the active cases here, and I can switch among them, and there's a slider here. A slider only loads the information that's visible, so it's cloud-friendly. We want to be cloud-friendly. Not only are you focusing the user's attention on the data you think they should see, but you're being cloud-friendly. So there's complaints. I have more space for the complaint so I can vertically align it, which is easier to scan. I have lots of room for my communication log. I don't remember which one there we go. Lots of communication for the communication log. And I have flat context because that's how the system was designed. So then the last thing I did was re-architect so that I could have a list of contacts listed by their role in the system or list their role on this particular case, allowing for searching for contacts to keep them from being deduped. So that's that quick example. I want to talk to you for just a little longer, if I may. We saw 3 case studies: Lee Real Estate, the Lost and Found Gallery, and Lux Hub. Oh, what time is it? Oh, we have a minute. Great. I was at the welcome reception last night, and I saw Adam Matthias of Gaze of FileMaker, and he said, well, Mark, are you going to sing? And I said, well, I wasn't thinking about singing. He said, well, what if you sing a song that starts with, let's go on a trip? So this is my improvisation about a trip. Oop, I just spilled water everywhere. And this is a sing-along, by the way. Let's go on a trip to Nantucket. We can rent a real expensive car. We can buy an upside-down urinal and hang it above the bar. Let's go to Nantucket Island we'll go. Come on. Let's go to Nantucket Island we'll go. We can drive all around the island. If our car starts to sink in the sand, we can find an old nylon fishing net. It's art. And haul it back onto the land. Let's go to Nantucket Island we'll go. Let's go to Nantucket Island we'll go. Yay! And go there with Lee Real Estate. They're a great business. So this was not lipstick on, well, you know, no pigs were harmed or otherwise involved in the making of this production. And this was interaction, visual appearance, interface organization and hierarchy, and process-driven design, thanks to Jake, Matt, and Alexis. And we have run out of time, but I won't sneak away. You can talk to me in the hallway. And it will have some kind of updates. I can't share the actual databases because they're confidential, but I will provide something more than what I put up originally. So please do fill out evaluations and try not to critique my singing. Thank you.